We got stressed cause we're striving, surviving, keep on moving to improving, rearranging. The whole world's changing, pandemic, systemic, rule making, rule breaking, disagreeing, now we're fighting or fleeing. Got a mind. Welcome to Minding the Gap. I'm Paul Bakke, licensed professional counselor with Behavioral Sciences of Alabama, and this is a podcast and video series where we talk about all things related to our minds and how we can navigate gaps that are created by stress. And I'm, as usual, joined by Dr. David Barnhart. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Listen, how are you on this sunny day today?
Oh, man, I tell you what, the sun, when the sun comes out like this, it just feels like it's seeping into my brain and it just lifts my mood. It's amazing.
It's nice to be able to just see that in my background and behind me, because we've had some cloudy days and cold days, and I'm ready for t-shirt weather.
I am with you 100%.
Well, we've been talking
bike riding weather.
That's right. Yes. I haven't ridden bike in a couple of months now, and my neighborhood partner is itching to get out there. He wanted me to ride when it was a good, nice day a couple of weeks ago, and I had to work, and he said, "You don't think Dr. Barnhart would go for, this might be an emergency counseling session for your bike riding partner?" And I said he probably wouldn't go for that. To cancel an appointment. So
that sounds like a pretty good reason to me. I know the cyclist you're talking about, and I'd say that's pretty good therapy.
Yeah. So we've been talking about exposure therapy. We started out with just the basics of what exposure therapy is, at the most elementary level, just facing what we would normally avoid, based on the anxiety that's created by triggers. And the exposure would be kind of an incremental process of developing a hierarchy and starting with smaller things and working up, basically getting used to or habituating to the stimulus. And last week we talked about social anxiety in different situations and way to set up exposure. I disappeared at the end, having some technical difficulties, and so you and Christine brought it home nicely.
Let me tell you, she's a good partner.
Yeah, she did really well. We're going to get more of our staff here involved, and we really need to start having some guests on. Bring some guests on, so we'll do that. But today we thought we would talk a little bit about contamination OCD and anxiety, and talk about how to do exposure with people who are afraid to touch things and get germs and get sick, and not only getting sick, but just the feeling of being contaminated. Sometimes that is the driver of the anxiety. It's not really getting sick. It's the feeling of the idea of being contaminated, that becomes intolerable. And I think it's and you had, Dr. Barnhart, you had done an interview with a local newscast about OCD and the effects of OCD in terms of contamination as well on for the pandemic has created more of a problem there, where people are really afraid, and that's been exacerbated by the pandemic. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, so it's so just kind of on that note, with regard to contamination and COVID-19 and its variants. Initially, the recommendation, and it stands today, the recommendation from experts in the area of OCD and was this: follow the protocol, wear a mask, wash your hands, socially distance.
That's just smart.
Yes.
That's just it's just protecting yourself, being safe.
And one of the things that this may seem unusual, but people that we've treated for the contamination variety of OCD, which is only one of many scores of types of OCD. But one of the things that we found is that the people that we've treated can follow the protocol. And they realize they don't need to stay in their house, that they can do some reasonable things, social distance, wash their hands, mask up, and actually go around in different areas of the community, particularly if you're in a store where they require masks and people are doing, following the protocol. That's very low probability, and they'll do this on purpose. I've got several that just people that I've worked with that go out a couple of times a week to make sure they're getting at least that amount of exposure and confronting the anxiety. And it really helps them manage their anxiety about contamination with COVID.
Good practice.
Yeah.
Good practice.
Yes.
And there's a difference between taking precautions that's just based on the science.
Yes.
And an exacerbated fear that's really not, and the whole idea with that OCD and the rituals, the compulsions, is that it creates a short-term feeling of relief, but that's never enough. So in terms of cleaning things, we want to keep things clean. We want to wear masks. We want to do things that keep us safe and healthy as best we can, but it just becomes overdone. Complete avoidance of anybody, or cleaning for hours, and the feeling that it's not quite clean enough, even though it's been clean, for several minutes. And people have come to us where they're just worn out at the end of the day because they've been cleaning all day, but they feel like they have to. And it's never, and the only thing that stops them is just exhaustion, because it doesn't, the idea of the masks and the distancing is, okay, I've done what I can do. Let me live my life here, keep distance, I don't have to do anything extra on top of it. And OCD becomes this extra. So when people say, well, I'm, so-and-so's really OCD about this, they're not really OCD if they're particular about something. OCD is when it's creating a big problem in their life.
That's right. And
they can't do normal things because they're obsessed with that short-term relief that's never enough. Yeah.
Yes, and so we often say that OCD is not an adjective. I'm a little OCD. Well, if you're saying that, you're not really likely to be OCD. So the ritual can get pretty, like if you're washing your hands, you're not singing happy birthday twice, to get 20 seconds, but you're making sure you get that finger. Now I got to get this finger, and then I do all 10 fingers that way. And then I got to repeat it because I'm not sure that maybe I didn't exactly do that right. And so I could get stuck in that loop over and over again. I guess that's what a loop is. And then at the end of the day, I'm exhausted. We've seen people that have cleaned so much, they've been on their feet so long. At the end of the day, they've literally spent 8 or 10 hours cleaning themselves. So they're okay to be in the house without contaminating the house.
Yeah, and it often leads to depression because it's just all this energy that's put in there, and there's this fatigue, and it can't accomplish things, and it's not feeling better, and there's this massive effort to feel better in this unhelpful way that their brain is telling them Do this. Do this. Do it again.
People, when we think about this, and as you talked about, it's not always necessarily germs. It's a feeling of being dirty or being contaminated. And sometimes people aren't able to really explain it. Sometimes the fear is that they're going to inhale something like, and it can be pretty esoteric, like caffeine molecules could get into my body and change my brain. Now, that may sound just really crazy, but our minds can make all kinds of connections. And the individual they're not psychotic, but OCD has gone to this place where I'm trying to rule out any possible effect.
Looking for certainty.
Yes.
That this is taken care of and then it's not going to happen. And there's there's all these rules that can be created, and then more rules on top of the rules. And the whole idea is it's never satisfied. So it's just more rules, more rules, more rules.
This is why we call OCD the doubting disease, because we really can't develop certainty. There's almost nothing except death that we know of right now. Okay, that you and I are probably going to die. All right, it's pretty likely. We'll have our season, and we're like the grass. At some point, we'll turn brown. So we'll just
return,
melt into the soil and help raise a crop somewhere. So we're pretty sure of that, but almost nothing else is that certain.
Yep.
Even taxes apparently they're not that certain. People used to say death and taxes, but I'm not sure.
I was thinking that same thing. There's a lot of ways to get around that.
Somebody's not paying taxes, I think. There's been some rumor to that.
Yeah.
But I thought it might be.
That's for a different video.
Yeah, that might be fun, but we may have to do it somewhere else. So different types of contamination. So we've got, something that could get into your body that would change your brain or make you be the person that you're not currently. There's this emotional contamination. The idea that, and there's some truth in this, if I hang around somebody, I could become like them. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of a grounding in reality there, because people do have an influence on us, but this is really more, this is more pathological. So the idea that if they sat in that chair right over there, I don't want to sit in that chair, because if I do, I could be contaminated and become like them.
Right. Yeah, and it's irrational, but it's real to the person.
Yes, it is.
And it's connected to a really bad feeling, mm-hmm. that, and so we talked about the difference between, seeing a bear, mm-hmm. And that we need to have that feeling. But when someone with OCD has a fear of sitting in the same room with a person because they're going to socially contaminate them, or they've been physically at a place that they feel like is contaminated, and now they're going to be contaminated through germs and things like that, that it's the same feeling as life is in danger. There's I have to do something to protect myself. Mm-hmm. And the rational side of the brain is just shut off. The same way that you don't stand in the middle of the road and the car's coming and go, let me think about what to do here. You just have a feeling and you see it and you get out of the way and you think later.
Yeah, so it's all kinds of things. It could be chemistry, it's different types of chemical contaminants.
Sticky things.
Sticky things, yeah. How about this one? A fear of becoming pregnant. through contamination. Yeah.
You don't have OCD. If you don't have OCD, it's just, you go, what? But if somebody with OCD, it's real. That's that real feeling connected to this made up thought.
Yes. Just
that leads to this behavior that's designed to make that fear go away.
Right.
And,
so people
it doesn't matter too. Like it for someone's different. It may be that door. I can't touch that door. That door is okay. There's some kind of logic that happens that says this door is bad and that one's not. And so it's very personal, and it can become just stuck with one certain person. So it manifests itself in so many different ways for different people. And the OCD logic is, sometimes it's very unpredictable.
It is. And so the treatment, we've been talking about the treatment for these types of fears. And it really goes against the grain, because all of these things have some kind of internal logic that connects. And contamination is certainly one of those, or eating something that might make you sick. So I avoid these foods because they came from California. and I heard that there was some kind of pollution over there in the soil, and it's maybe, and there may be some logic to it, but so you avoid eating salads, and then it generalizes to other salads. So to avoid getting contaminated, you just don't eat any salad. Just stop eating salad.
Just to be certain.
Just let's be sure of this. And then, did this plate have a salad on it before I got it?
It continues to, it grows and grows and grows.
Yes.
Talk a little bit, if you will, about typical treatment, the timing of treatment. How, when it first starts happening, how long do people typically wait before it's diagnosed as OCD?
Yeah, this is a little difficult to believe, but we see it all the time in our practice. The average time frame between when symptoms began to appear and when the person gets diagnosed, it runs about 17 years.
Wow.
Which is a crazy long time, but we see it in our practice. I mean, I've had people with OCD who are in their 70s, and they've had it all their lives, and they were never diagnosed. And you would think in today's world, particularly with things like, I don't know, TV shows like Monk, or I don't know, there are some others, with people who, or famous people with OCD. You find out about them, and but they're not diagnosed, and some people have been misdiagnosed. So,
yeah,
with a
so
fear.
by the time a lot of people come to therapy, they've had years of practice with the avoidance safety behaviors. And so they're being conditioned. It's difficult to undo that.
Yes, it does. And it's hard to have faith in it, because, when we talk to people about doing, especially the exposure work, we're asking them to confront their fears that they've had, very unpleasant, and they've been avoiding that for so long.
Yeah. They haven't experienced the relief that goes along with the exposure. So the first part of that is we want them to drive their anxiety up so that it will peak and come down, but they've been lowering it so fast that thinking about doing that, even talking about the process of exposure, is really upsetting to a lot of people who have not done it before, because they don't have experience. They haven't experienced the drop in anxiety, and you ask them to touch something or start doing that, and the goal is, and so homework is difficult because we've talked about this before, it's very unpleasant, and we rather do other things than sit and do exposure.
Distract ourselves.
Right. So that's where we've talked about the hierarchy, and especially somebody that's brand new, suggesting the possibility of starting out with something a little bit easier. And an example of that might be, if I believe this computer is contaminated and I can't touch that in fact, I can't get within 5 feet of it, then the first part of that may be get within 5 feet of it, and get your hand closer and closer to it. And so being close to it is going to drive that anxiety up. It might not drive it up to a 10 out of 10, but it may drive it up to where at least they're experiencing exposure, and there's a chance for it to come down, and you get used to being closer and moving forward that way. So there's a lot of ways with contamination in terms of touching things. You don't have to start touching things that are easier first necessarily. You might just get closer to it and do hover, touch something that's touched something else. So why don't you talk a little bit about some of the methods that are like that?
Well, those are really good examples. And so we'll have people use the hover concept, and basically if this hand is contaminated, I'm just hovering over that hand, and I'll see how close I can get. And of course, the closer you come, the higher the anxiety will go up, because that's what your brain is supposed to do, is generate this threat detection when you're close to something that would be life or health threatening. So we'll do that. We'll also do things like use a tissue and create a barrier, so that, like, if I'm going to touch a doorknob, if this is a doorknob and I'm going to touch the doorknob, then I might have a tissue between my hand and the doorknob, and so I'm making contact with the doorknob, but there's a tissue between it. So the logic is that, well, there's a barrier, so I'm probably not going to be contaminated. But from a brain standpoint, I've just touched the doorknob, and that may be
I felt the solidness of the knob, and
yes. And then we do things like, okay, can you touch it with your knuckle, with the back of your hand, right? And then we'll progress from that point at some level. Then we'll have people touch something and then rub their hands together so they're really nice and contaminated and
good spread.
Exactly. And the advanced stage of treatment would be, now I'm going to take it and I'm going to rub that contamination all over myself so that I'm totally contaminated. We might even take a contamination rag. It's our term. You just take a cloth or a rag or a tissue or something, and you wipe it on the contaminated surface, and then you go around your house and you rub that contamination rag on everything in the house, so there's no way to avoid touching something that has been, and the term that people with this disorder often use is cross-contamination. So you can imagine, so you're making this progression that moves closer and closer to fully being functional in an environment. So you can touch anything in the environment.
And get to the point where if you need a mask, if you don't need to touch something because it makes sense, then you just live your life those kinds of ways. But like we've said before, with other exposures, we're going to ask clients to go extreme with some things, once they get up the ladder of the hierarchy, and do things that people normally wouldn't do, just to habituate to the exposure.
Right.
So anybody that's watching this, I want you to think about whether you would do this or not. Would you go to a public restroom at the mall, let's say, and rub your hands over the toilet for a minute? How many people would do that? Just we asked them to do it.
Between you and me, you and I would.
So I talk to people about this quite a bit. I wouldn't do that. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Right? But we're asking clients to kind of go that extreme to get to the point where they can just go and use the bathroom and flush the toilet and wash their hands and leave.
Yes.
And they don't have to avoid it all the time. And it's creating, they're having to take these circuitous routes to places because this place is clean and that's not. And, people can live their lives. So it goes pretty extreme.
Oh, Paul, we've seen kids go all day at school without going to the bathroom.
Right.
Holding it all day.
It's not healthy. Yeah, it's not good. They got to be able to use the bathroom. If you need to wipe the seat off before you sit down, okay, yeah. But in the beginning or during exposure, it's let's get to the point where you can really do some hard things, because the whole idea of it is driving that anxiety up. And if somebody can habituate to things like touching this toilet seat that most of us would think is really disgusting, then they can just live normally. And the idea is being able to tolerate that feeling and do what they need to do.
Exactly. So that's one of the things that people will commonly think about is contamination as an example of OCD. We talk about virtually all of the other ways that OCD can manifest itself, and we've kind of left the contamination part out because that's what people, either that or symmetry, getting something exactly right or stacked right. And I think that's where we often hear people say, I'm a little OCD, that's got to be, these books have got to be lined up, kind of thing.
Have people coming and straightening your tie up.
Yeah.
I can't stand it. Can't stand it.
Now, it would be OCD if you couldn't go to sleep at night because those books weren't in line. Right.
Can't move on. It's got to be done before you can move on. Or most of us, if we enjoy being, I say we, I don't mean myself, being neat and organized, because that really doesn't mean a whole lot to me. If you just look at my environment anywhere I am, you'll know that. But when I say we, I mean, if a person or a group of people just enjoy being neat and organized, they just like it, and they don't, but it doesn't bother them to the point where they can't move on.
They don't have to go back to the office,
right,
to put those pencils in place.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so another part of it's intrusive thoughts. Not sure how much we've talked about that.
Not a lot, but we should talk more about that.
So intrusive thoughts would be this thought that just pops up. That's, I'm going to harm someone. I think we talked a little bit about it in the exposure. We're going to harm someone, or we've talked about fear of religious kind of things. I've got thoughts about negative thoughts about God, just pop up, and I got to pray to undo that thought. I got to think a positive thought every time. So the intrusive thoughts would be these unwanted thoughts that come up that create this anxiety, and you do something to neutralize those thoughts, and they don't represent the person's values. They just come up and they're bothersome. So, and then we tell clients all the time that the fact that it bothers you means you don't want it, and you probably aren't going to do this thought of hurting someone, or sometimes people are afraid that they just run someone over and hit a bump. These thoughts come up and start taking over their lives.
Yes. Well, even going back to contamination a little bit, just the thought, did I when I walked by that chair, did I touch it?
Yeah.
And so then they're
got to go wash my hands just in case.
Right. Or replay it in my head to try to see if I might have done that and just didn't realize it. And so we can do these kind of mental checks, and those aren't obvious to anybody but the person suffering them.
Yeah. One client has an intrusive thought about committing a crime. Never committed a crime before, just and is afraid might accidentally, and did it and didn't know. So checking the police reports, checking out the window when the car goes by, is that police come in, but it's completely out of just intrusive, made up, and not grounded in any reality. I think we would all can relate to the fear of doing something wrong, and the fear of getting in trouble, and that how it's mess up our lives and that kind of thing. But just in terms of there's no rational behavior behind it. There's none of that. It's just this made up thought that becomes this feeling that makes it feel real. So I got to do something to get relief from that, and then over and over and over again. So the intrusive thoughts can really come in any form.
Yes.
Any kind of form.
Maybe we should, in a future episode, focus some attention on just intrusive thoughts and talk about the idea that everybody has intrusive thoughts. Not everybody has OCD.
Right.
And maybe even talk about some of the common intrusive thoughts that people have that don't have OCD.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Something pops up about hurting someone.
Yeah. Standing on the edge of a cliff.
Jumping off.
I could jump off. And the anxiety goes up just a little bit, and so you take a couple of steps back, but then you move on and walk down the trail, and you forgot that you even did that.
Yeah, there's people we work with people it may be a fear of heights, but it may not be the fear of heights. It might just be of driving off the road, or maybe jumping off. What if I did that? What if I just did that out of impulse? The fear. And so I avoid anything close to any balcony or railing, or I don't drive on passes.
Oh yeah.
So the exposure would be sometimes imaginal exposure of thinking about doing that, watching a video of somebody on a high wire or something like that, or a car driving over a bridge, thinking about it, and then doing it, doing a small low bridge. What we talked about, walking at the mall in the center, instead of next to the railing, and then progressively moving towards the railing where they can, if they chose to, jump over. So they're facing their fear. And so there's all kinds of different ways to address that in the hierarchy.
Yes.
And one of the things I wanted to say too, just about exposure, and I don't think we've mentioned this really, is that, and this is a real important thing, is that sometimes when clients will get better, they'll do their hierarchy and they'll work on their exposure and it gets better, something else pops up. It's almost like OCD is sort of this entity that in and of itself that's just trying to stay alive. And, of course, we're making that up, but it's just a metaphor really. But it's kind of what's happening is get better at this, and then something new will pop up, and then maybe and then a lot of times the client will just forget all the things that they did to improve on that, and they'll get back to a ritual with something else. One teenager had written in the International OCD Foundation newsletter, was a baseball fan. So I was like, okay, I'm going to read this. OCD is like baseball. I'm going to read that. I'm a baseball fan, baseball guy. So, and he talked about, he said, he's like, just really enjoys baseball. He was thinking about it, and he has OCD. And he was saying that OCD is like the pitcher, and the balls that he's throwing to the batter are like the obsessions, and the batter is swinging at these pitches that are not in the strike zone. They're in the dirt, they're over the head, but the batter just keeps swinging in order to hit the ball. And he talked about how when a person gets better, they learn to let the pitch go, not swing. Just learn how to recognize, oh, that's an obsession. I'm not going to swing at that. I'm not going to do the compulsion. I get better. I feel better. And okay, things are better. And then the pitcher says, okay, how about this curveball?
Yeah.
And then the batter can't recognize the spin on the ball, and then starts swinging at the pitches again. And it's this constant adjustment to different kind of pitches, like a hitter has to do. But I thought that was a good analogy of how sometimes it can just change form into something else and not really be recognizable in the beginning.
That's right. And so that's why we do relapse prevention plans with this idea that as our life moves on and other things become important to us,
Sure.
we can become obsessive compulsive about those things. Doesn't mean that we will, but once you have this kind of proclivity and have had that experience, it can certainly OCD can kind of wax and wane. But
Sure.
if you're prepared for it, then you begin to get pretty good at recognizing it.
The process is the same. It's just it's recognizing it and doing what was done before. An example would be, I remember having a client that was talking about he was an adult, married, kids, and his obsessions was about his wife and his kids' fear for their safety. He was really afraid, and so he wouldn't let him go spend the night out, calling and checking if he was out of town or away from them. And there was these compulsions that were trying to make him feel better about their safety, and it was getting in the way. And he said that wasn't always the case. Of course, he didn't have kids and a wife all the time, but when he was a kid, his obsession was completely different, because it was just in a different, whatever's important to the person typically will come up as worry about that, because it is normal to worry about certain things.
Yes.
But to the point of exaggerated and compulsions and instant relief, it can change form and take the form of something that's important in that season of life.
Yes. Yes. Well, did we cover it?
I think so. I think we got it. So okay. So maybe might talk about intrusive thoughts, maybe in connection with some religion. What do we call it?
Scrupulosity.
Scrupulosity.
Yeah.
Lost the term for a second. Scrupulosity would be a religious fear of doing something against God, or some against religious values,
or just against your moral beliefs. If you don't have a God in your life, it could just be a moral issue, doing the right thing.
So we'll come back and do something on that. And hopefully we can get young Dave Barnhart to help us out with that one.
we will see if we can get him on board to do
I
that.
say young. He's younger than
Yeah,
me.
well, yeah. Yeah. Everybody's younger than me, so I'm talking young Paul Bakke, of course. Yeah.
I'll take that. I'll take it.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. I hope everybody has a good day. Remember to subscribe, comments, like, give us great feedback, tell us what you'd like to hear about. We enjoy doing this. Hopefully it helps out.
Nice work. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.